I'm the kind of person I think that when I see suffering, I want to know why, and I want to know if there are things that can be done to alleviate it. I think it's made me realize that music was always just a thing that I did, but it doesn't have to be the kind of be all, end all.
This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set, where each week we explore the lives of drummers. I want to play something for you. You're hearing Cut Self Not by Faraquet, featuring my guest, Chad Molter, on drums. Formed in Washington, D.C. in 1997, Faraquet filtered proggy musical sophistication through the prism of punk rock. Originally a bassist, Molter became proficient on drums in a matter of months, his DIY approach leading to a uniquely melodic style. After Faraquet broke up, Chad played bass for Medications, another band featuring Faraquet bandmate Devin Ocampo on guitar. Chad currently resides in Boulder, Colorado, where he works as a director of a homeless shelter and plays drums with the band Grass. And now my conversation with Chad Molter.
The backseat of my father's 60s Chevy, crying because he was going to take me to get my hair cut. I remember the back seat was all dug out. It was like upholstery was coming out of it. The car was in poor shape, so I don't know. I must have been like 4 or 5. I don't know why that memory sticks with me.
Do you still hate haircuts?
You can tell. I kind of do still hate haircuts. The only person I let give me a haircut is Liz for the last 15 years.
We've talked about this because we're friends, but your family, pretty central to their existence is their Christian faith. Were you a believer when you were a kid?
That's difficult to say. I don't know if I was really old enough to fully grasp it, but culturally it was a big part of how I was raised. So I guess I didn't know another way, so I didn't kind of question it.
On an emotional level, was religion kind of coupled together with your love of your family when you were a kid? When you went to church, did you feel the spirit?
No, I actually didn't. I never really connected with it in that kind of visceral way. It always felt somewhat forced to me, just for me personally. So I always felt a little bit of an outsider in that way. They were all very involved, and by all appearances, they really felt the Holy Spirit, as you say. I never really remember feeling that. But again, I didn't really know any other way, so it was just kind of there from the beginning.
When did your interest in music become more central to your identity?
I think when I reached my early teens and I started to see that it became very apparent that I wasn't going to be a popular kid. And I was in band.
What do you mean it became very apparent?
Well, I tried, and I was failing at being popular. And I was in band, And I had a group of friends who turned me on to like punk, like early 80s hardcore music. And so that then became very important to me, I think, as a fallback from, as I say, I wasn't going to be a popular kid. So I think I'd latched on to that. It became somewhat of an identity for me.
To be a punk kid. Did something about the message or the attitude of that music speak to you?
Yes. The attitude of, we don't care, we're going to do what we want to do, regardless of labels. I mean, the stuff that I was into was early California stuff. So it wasn't...
So like SST and Alternative Tentacles kind of stuff?
Right. And so it wasn't style-heavy punk. It was after kind of that. So they were just... It was very interesting to me that I would pull up pictures of these people, or you have the fanzine or whatever and see pictures of people, and they just look like regular... They weren't rock stars. They were just like regular kids.
Right. Whereas a band like the Sex Pistols or the Ramones was very stylized. Band like the Minutemen just looked like dorky kids from San Pedro.
Yeah, and that was inspiring to me. And it was also inspiring that they were from nearby.
Except for George Hurley, who had a different look altogether. But the other guys, George Hurley looked like George Hurley looked like the cool surfer bro that they convinced to be in their band.
Well, there was a little bit of that mixed in with that as well. I mean, there was the surf and skate culture was all mixed up in that as well, which was very prevalent at that time, mid 80s.
Did you have a vision for what you wanted to do with your life by the time you were a teenager?
I think I was trying to avoid having a vision for what my life would be at that point.
How come?
Because I saw other people around me who had it figured out, and probably because I was jealous of them, and so I responded with, this attitude of, well, I'm gonna do my own thing, and then this music really, as I said, gave me this identity.
What do you mean by seeing other people around you who had it figured out? What does it mean to have it figured out?
Well, in my mind at that time, I think had it figured out. They were planning their lives, what they were going to do after high school and things like that. And so I think I responded to that with an attitude that said I wasn't going to do that, or that wasn't important to me. And I mean, how important can it be to you when you're in junior high or high school?
Right.
I saw that as just another signifier of, people falling into line, I guess, doing what they're supposed to do.
Now, with the benefit of like looking back in retrospect, do you wish you would have done anything differently as a kid?
I really don't know. I mean, of course, you sometimes look back and you could see other paths that you may have taken, and that would be... It could have been interesting if I would have gone another way, certainly. But I don't regret the path that I took. I think it was I did what I had to do given the circumstances I was in, and so I almost see it as the kind of the only thing I could have done.
What do you mean the circumstances you were in?
I think that just where I was at, I felt, as I said, I felt a little bit alienated in my family. I felt a little bit alienated in that I never really felt at home in Southern California. I have these memories of being pretty young, maybe like elementary school age, and talking to other kids about how I was going to move to another state. I don't know where that came from, but I never really felt, I guess the place that I grew up in never really clicked with me. It never felt like home. I always felt like home was somewhere else out there. And some of that is just grass is greener, kind of wanderlust stuff. But So I guess what I'm saying is,
But on the other hand, you've never moved back here. I mean, you left when you were
I
like
left.
20 years old and never
Yeah.
came back.
Yeah.
So I guess you were right.
Well, I mean, I'm right in as much as
You were right to
right for myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like knowing that the place from which you came maybe wasn't the best place to stay as an adult.
For me, yeah. I mean, even at that, yeah. Even as a kid, but as an adult, yeah, it was not a good match, a good fit for me. Let's just say, to be diplomatic. And today, that's still the case. When I come back, I still feel like it's not necessarily for me.
When did you formally kind of move away from the church?
I think when I moved out of my parents' house, which was like late teens, and then I didn't have to abide by their rules anymore, then I moved away or stopped going to church, because it was very strict. It was church every Sunday and maybe like one other time during the week. So it was enforced. You were living in the house. That's what you did. And I'll just say, I mean, they respect to them. This is what they believe in, and this is what they. That's why they did it. It didn't, I don't begrudge them.
It seems like you
It's
still
what
have a
they
really
felt.
good relationship with your family.
I still have a great relationship with them. I still have a ton of respect for them, especially how they raised me and my siblings.
Well, what did your siblings end up doing?
Mostly going into teaching. One of my brothers is a teacher and actually runs a school in Senegal for like an international school in Senegal. My oldest brother is actually a pastor of a church in San Diego, so he went into that kind of ministry. And then my sister is a teacher as well.
What's your job title right now?
I'm an administrator for a homeless shelter. So I'm a director of programs at a homeless shelter. So I help run a program. Yeah.
So basically, everyone in your family went into service in some way or another.
Yeah. Yes. And that was a big part about a big part of how I was raised, that you would use your talents and energies to serve other people or help maybe the less fortunate, which is, as I said, I have a lot of respect for that aspect of it.
The Trap Set will always be available for free, but we rely on donations from our listeners. Please visit our website at thetrapset.net and click donate. Subscribe to our show on iTunes, and if you enjoy what you hear, give us a review.
I moved away from California in 1994, so I was 21 or 22. I moved with a friend of mine, Devin Ocampo,
A friend of mine, too.
and a friend of yours as well. So we had been friends he's from Whittier as well. So we kind of grown up together, and that we were friends. We met in high school and became close maybe a little bit after high school, and played music in Whittier for several years, 3, 4, 5 years before moving away.
What drew you to New York?
So I had been there a couple of times, had visited, and I just loved the energy of the city. So I remember when I went there on one trip, I was maybe in 7th or 8th grade. I remember just saying to myself, I have to get back here at some point. So it was one of those places that I felt like I needed to at least try to live in. And then we knew one person who lived there, and that gave us a leg up. And then Devin's Devin's family kind of helped us break in a little bit as well. So Devin's sister lived there, and his mother secured us a year lease on an apartment by like co-signing.
What was your life like in New York?
Not at all really like I thought it would be. We ended up just working a lot to pay our rent. You know, we got there immediately. We had a rent to pay, and it was our first time living out on our own. So we tried to play music. That was our intent, to do it as much as we could, but it proved a little bit difficult because of the fact that we had to pay rent, and it's New York, and it's a little bit. You know, it was definitely a little more fast paced than we had anticipated, coming from the laid back,
SoCal.
casual SoCal. So we were struggling to keep up, for sure.
How long were you in New York?
For a year.
And then you moved to DC?
And then we moved to DC.
Did you have a particular dream in mind when you moved to DC? Like, did you think, oh, maybe we could get on Discord and tour with Fugazi, or be in a band that's as successful as Fugazi or something?
Yes, but that would have been the, you know, I think that would have been the uppermost of what I would have expected to happen, or outside of what my expectations honestly would have been if you would have asked me at the time. But yeah, certainly. I mean, it was to play music. That's why that was what we lived and breathed at that time. That was the reason for being.
Did you feel a desire to make a living playing music, or was that kind of counter to your punk ethos at the time?
It was a little bit counter to our ethos, or at least my ethos, I think, at the time. It was a little bit of a different time then, and maybe making a living at playing music was
a little more stigmatized.
A little more stigmatized. But you know, yeah, I don't know. Our heroes that, you know, when we would hear their stories, they all worked, and we were fine with that. I mean, I think there was this dream that we could maybe just travel and pay our bills, you know, tour constantly and pay our bills someday.
How did you get into playing drums?
So I was primarily bass player, and I'd played bass since I was 15. My father helped me get a bass. I had played bass instruments before that. I played trombone, so I was familiar with the bass clef, and I think it.
I see that tattoo of the bass clef you have on your forearm.
No, there is no tattoo of the bass clef on my forearm. I think
there is a tattoo of the John Bonham symbol on your shin.
There is. I think it fit my personality. The kind of, you know.
It's the service instrument of music.
Exactly.
And so is drums.
And drums too, right. So I've been playing in bands since I was 15. Yeah, primarily bass. But there was always a drum set around, as you know. And so you know, when you're a kid, what do you do when there's a drum set around and practice is over? You hop on the drum set and everybody takes a turn. And so I had been doing that up until the time we moved to DC. And Devin and I had both played quite a bit. He was more serious about it, and he'd become pretty accomplished by that time as a drummer. When we moved to DC, he immediately got into a band playing drums. And that he met somebody in that band who was Jeff Boswell, who became the bass player for Faraquet, and Devin plays guitar. And they needed a drummer, and I was around and told them that I could do it, and they decided to try to make it happen, and we did. And it was, I think they had a lot of patience with me. I'd never played drums in a band before. They kind of let me develop over time.
Well, not that much time, because you got good pretty quickly.
I got good enough to play shows, I think, because I had a little bit of a foundation. But I think Devin worked with me quite a bit, and he's definitely more of a person, personality-wise, who will sit there and figure something out and spend a lot of time. He can be very focused. So he'd figured out some things, some tricks that he taught me. But I remember there were some aha moments that he kind of led me through, things that he had figured out.
What are you most proud of when it comes to that band, Faraquet?
I think it's a good kind of representation of what Devin and I had been working on, many years prior. And I don't know, I think I'm proud that we were able to kind of get a finished product from things that had been in development for years prior to that. We had a band in LA, and if you heard it, you may think, well, it sounds, there's similar songwriting tendencies, but that was a fully kind of realized vision of that amalgam of progressive rock and punk that I was talking about. So.
This episode of The Trap Set is brought to you in part by Colectivo Coffee. Handmade coffee since 1993. Check them out online at colectivo.com.
So you left and walked the Appalachian Trail, right?
I did. In 2002, I decided I need to... Well, it had been something that I wanted to do for a little while, but I just needed to take a break from music. And so I kind of took some time to prepare and then did that in the spring of 2002.
What did you gain from that experience?
I learned how adaptable we are. I think I learned to appreciate the simple things a little bit more. Being outside for 4 months, and really simplifying your life in that way. I think it was good for me to strip everything away and get to that. And yeah, there were no great revelations or epiphanies per se. I enjoy being alone for long stretches of time, and I knew that about myself. But
do you feel like it changed you as a person when you came back? Did you have a different perspective? You're shaking your head no.
Not really. I mean, I wish it did, but
yeah.
I mean, it's just one of the. I look at it as just like a thing that I did. It was interesting to do. It's too long to be backpacking. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody.
So you don't have an impulse to do something like that again?
Sometimes I feel like I want to. I think it goes back to when I was younger. It's a little bit of an escape impulse, or like let's get out there and see what's out there, or I'm not feeling great about what's going on in my life right now, so let me try to do this thing, and maybe it'll stir up something that will lead me to a new path. It didn't necessarily do that, but I mean, it was an interesting experience. It was a good experience. I look back fondly on it.
And then shortly after you came back, you started playing bass again with Devin, and you guys started what became known as Medications.
Yeah. So pretty shortly after I got back into town, Devin and I hadn't really been in communication since Faraquet ended. You probably know more about that period of time than I do. Because
yes, I played drums in his band during that time.
You were with him.
Yeah. And we were roommates.
So he was doing some other bands, and I think what happened is he lost his bass player. His bass player moved, and somehow we connected, and it all happened very quickly. And I just got back in there and learned some bass parts, and I think we recorded really, really quickly after that as well for that first EP.
How would you characterize the chemistry of that band?
I think the chemistry was good. It was, we wrote as a group, as in Faraquet. It's never a situation where kind of one person would bring in fully formed songs. And I think for a period of time, it worked out well. I mean, it was a different thing than Faraquet in that it was really kind of a little bit more balls to the wall rock than Faraquet had ever been. But that I think that's a product of where Devin was and wanting to really exercise that muscle. And Andy, being the drummer that he allowed him to go for it.
What went into the decision to stop doing that band?
There was never really a decision to stop doing it. So we in 2010 we put out the last record, and we did some touring. And then I remember looking at Devin at some point. Maybe we were in Detroit, and just saying, I don't think this is really worth it. At least the touring aspect anymore. There were diminishing returns. I mean, Medications the entire time it was diminishing returns from the get-go. From the first EP to the second two LPs, it seemed like fewer and fewer people were interested, which is fine. But it just felt like we had no business touring anymore. And then I needed to change.
It's hard to know when you're supposed to persevere and get through a down cycle, because it's always darkest before the dawn, right? And when it's like time to call it quits.
Well, I mean, it's also hard too, because Devin and I mean, we're not trying to make it big. We were never like, we just need our big break. I mean, we just want to play music, and if there are enough people interested, in order for it to be sustainable, great. So it didn't seem like it was sustainable at that point. And I was needing a break from DC, and that was around the time that I moved out to Colorado, and Devin stayed in BC. We tried to kind of continue a little bit after that. We did some touring, but eventually, with enough distance, and Devin and I being the people we are, as far as our inability to collaborate over long distances, it's just kind of faded away. So it hasn't really ended, and there's still a very long gestating Medications record out there, and maybe we'll finish it someday.
Tell me what you're up to right now. You mentioned earlier you work at a homeless shelter.
Yeah, so I work at a homeless shelter. I've been doing that for 8 years. It's something I kind of fell into as far as specifically working for the homeless. But I when I moved to Colorado, I felt like I wanted to do something that was a little bit more outward focused as far as helping others. And so I got into that, and I really enjoyed it.
Do you feel like playing music is a selfish pursuit?
Thanks for asking. I was going to clarify that. No, but I think it can be a little bit insular in a way. And so for me, focusing on music it helps me to be able to focus on other people when I want to progress more personally. When in the music thing, when it's so kind of inward focused, I felt like I was not progressing as a human being as much as I would like, if that makes sense.
Okay. So what do you do at the homeless shelter?
So I oversee a program there of what we call emergency sheltering. So we have 160 beds, and every night people who are in need of a place to stay show up, and we do intake for them, and we provide basic need services for them at the shelter for the night. So I kind of oversee the staff and make sure that everything is running smoothly. But I mean, I started there as a staff person and kind of worked my way up over time.
So you said earlier that you didn't feel like you were progressing as much as a person just by playing music. Now that you've been doing this for several years, how have you progressed as a person?
Well, I think I've learned a lot more about people, specifically people with acute needs, and that has, acute kind of physical, mental health needs, and I think it helps me get a more complete picture of the challenges that humankind faces, and I mean that's helpful for me as a person. I want to know. I'm the kind of person, I think, that when I see suffering, I want to know why, and I want to know if there are things that can be done to alleviate it. And so it's helped me explore that in depth. I had no expectations going into this line of work about what it would be. And I think it's been really good for me in that I've learned a lot about people, and you can't help but learn about yourself when you learn about others. So,
do you derive joy from your work?
I do. It's a super uplifting place to work. Every time somebody moves on to a place of more stability, it's reason for everyone to celebrate, and so every kind of small step forward for the people who use our services, we all feel it. I mean, that's why we're there. So I mean, I do it as much for myself as for the people that we serve. But there's
nothing wrong with that, because we're inherently empathetic creatures, right?
Right. I mean, and that's another thing I learned is you can't be 100% kind of altruistic about this.
Well, also the fact that altruism and self-interest aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
Sure, it's all wrapped up together.
So how has your notion of the issue of homelessness evolved in your years there?
So I think when I went in, I didn't really know anything about it. I quickly learned that there are all these reasons why people are homeless. They're mentally ill. They have addiction issues. They have physical issues. They're products of generational poverty. They've made a couple bad decisions and found themselves kind of backed up against the wall. So it quickly becomes very complicated and nuanced and can become very overwhelming. So I think for a period of time, I thought a lot about how do we fix all of these problems that are presenting to us every day? There's so many of them, as many as the number of people that we see. And just lately, in the last couple of years, I think it's been very liberating to me to get to a place where I feel that, it's no longer the objective to fix people, but really to get them out of homelessness. And so that's been my primary objective lately, is how can we change things? How can we change the system so that we get people to stability, and then from there, if they want to work on these other things going on in their lives, they can do that. We can bring those services in for them. But this idea that we're going to fix people in homeless shelters has it's not something that I agree with or believe in at this point. And so that's been a change for me.
Why don't you agree with it?
Because they're really hard places to be. And, as nice as the homeless shelter I work at is, it's 160 people who are mentally ill, addicted, in heightened states of, agitation because of their situation. They've all been traumatized. It's just it's a hard place to say, okay, Joe, tonight we're going to work on getting you the help you need for schizophrenia and getting you meds and when you're in a homeless shelter and there's that degree of instability. And so it's a Band-Aid, but it seems to be something that we are spending more and more money on in this country. It's not, it's not the answer.
It seems to me like what you're saying is the issue is twofold. Number one, there are some people that are just not going to be functional in society. And number two, there are some people that are just down on their luck, and an institution like a homeless shelter isn't the right place for them to improve themselves and get themselves back to stability.
Yeah, and there are some people that it works for. Statistically, about half the people we see stay at the shelter 7 days or less in a period of time of 6 months. So that says to me that they're using it as a stopping off point between A and B. They have something else going on. The chronically homeless, the high acuity of need folks who are there a lot, it ends up being just not a good place for them. They get institutionalized, and it becomes the end of the line for them, so to speak. And it's hard to get people out of that. We've offered housing to people who turn us down. And it happens quite often because they'll look at us and say, my current situation is fine. I'm getting my basic needs met. So why would I want to take on rent? Why would I want to take on having to pay utilities? And I can't really blame them. We've, in a certain way, we've created that situation.
What would you do if you were in charge of policy?
I would put more resources towards housing, towards affordable housing, and that's it. Steer. It's pretty basic. Steer more resources towards housing. Different kinds of housing. Housing for chronically homeless with a lot of support, affordable housing for people who have a lower acuity of need and can, make it on their own. But just move resources away from the kind of charity aspect of homelessness into housing.
Like a social support system.
Yeah.
Has working with people in this capacity changed your relationship with music?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I think it's made me realize that music was always just a thing that I did, but that I also I have a lot of other interests, and it doesn't have to be the kind of be all end all. For a certain period of time, I put a lot of time and energy into it, and I still think it's really important. But for me personally, it's one of the things that I do, and I like doing it.
Right. It's not necessarily a hobby, it's a passion still.
Yes.
But it doesn't necessarily need to be the central component of your identity. It's one of many things that make up Chad.
Yes.
What are you thinking about for the next year of your life? Do you have goals or ambitions?
Yes, I think goals, I've been doing quite a bit more music recently. I've been playing with some people in Colorado. I've been playing live a little bit.
What's the name of the band that you're playing in Colorado?
So I started playing with this band called Grass a couple of months ago. They were kind of around before me, but I'm playing drums again, which is exciting for me to do that, get my chops up. once again and play live. I think playing live, I remember the first time I played live, I think most people do, and just being instantly hooked. So it's nice to have that back in my life experiences.
Where was the first place where you played live?
It was at a hall, I think it was in like Costa Mesa. There was like a hardcore show. There were probably 10 bands on the bill. It was one of those kind of things. But I remember our 20-minute set or whatever, getting off the stage and just being, feeling this elation and being totally hooked from that.
Do you still get that visceral feeling when you play now?
I still get that feeling, and it's great. And I'm still playing to. It doesn't matter. I'm playing to no one on a Wednesday night with this new band, and it still feels the same. It's just playing live. I can't remember who said this, but I mean, it's this idea that like a group of people get together and play. No matter how good they are, it's a small miracle that it happens, and I hold on to that, and it's a beautiful thing, whether you're making a horrible noise or a very sweet noise. It's nice.
I think that's a good place to end it. Chad Molter, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Joe.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.